1975 Fender Telecaster Custom with a thick polyester finish over the frets and fretboard. I sharpened up this scratch-all with a little bit of a beveled edge to try to see if we could knock some of these babies out sideways. I'll end up trying to do whatever works easiest, because let me tell you guys, when the finish is sprayed on this thick over top of the frets, it is annoying, and it's really hard to get the frets out. You'll never be able to grab them with your regular end cutters to pry them up towards the ceiling unless you chisel off some of this stuff. So one of the tried and true methods is to try to knock them out sideways towards the wall, same way they were installed at the factory back in the day in Fullerton, California. But that wasn't working. For some reason, they're holding on with a death grip. So what I do is I go in a very acute angle and make a cut in either side of the fret crown with a 13 thousandths of an inch diamond nut slotting file. That allows me to get those end cutters in there and get started. So if you look over the next few minutes and look at the 12th fret slot, 12th and 13th, I managed to knock two of them out sideways towards the wall, but the other ones came up towards the ceiling. And it really doesn't matter how clean these slots look, because they're only going to look this clean until I get the frets in again. From the point when I get the new frets in to the point where they get taken out the third time, third time, they're going to look a little chewed up. They only look clean that first time. This is how I chisel off that thick poly ledge. It's like a mound of polyester going up and over each fret. And these frets, not only does it have the polyurethane or polyester material as a barrier to getting them out, but they're super duper low. So it's the worst feeling guitar you've ever played. It's like a fretless guitar is what it feels like. After chiseling, I use a box cutter to score. And then I go in at that very acute angle with the nut files. Those are my Luth brushes, those black pieces that I'm holding on to. Those are called Luth brushes, and you can pick those up at luthtool.com. The Music Nomad nut slotting files, you can get those directly from Music Nomad or from Sweetwater or on Amazon probably. Anyways, some of these camera angles weren't the best. I did save the best ones for the video, and I'll leave some of the others on the editing room floor, so to speak. There's a good shot. Getting them up. But sometimes the poly chips off. The whole thing that my whole intention here was to try to preserve the poly finish. But after thinking about it, and when I started sanding through it, because I got a little aggressive. It was so thick that I had to use aggressive power tools. That in the end I decided to refinish the whole thing in nitro and add a little bit of that ambered color to the fretboard, which we couldn't have gotten if we would have preserved the polyester. The Fender factory started using polyester because they needed a quick and easy way to spray on and do pore filling on their ash bodies. So a lot of these old guitars, you'll find a thick polyester sealer coat or base coat under a sunburst finish. That the sunburst, the color coat, and the clear top coat over top of the sunburst will be nitro, and you'll always see the headstocks done in nitro. But a lot of times, the bodies and these maple necks were done in this thick polyester. If you ever find yourself doing one of these jobs, you'll probably want to charge extra because it's got about 10 extra steps than just doing a rosewood fretboard. You don't ever use a chisel on a rosewood fretboard. You don't have to refinish a rosewood fretboard. You don't have to do a lot of this stuff. You don't have to do that usually. But I had to do, I'll take you through the whole process of sanding it off, spraying a base coat, sealer, color coats of a color tone stain called straw, and then additional clear coats on top of that of shellac and nitrocellulose lacquer. The frets pull out a little easier when I drop in a little diluted simple green after scoring. Now they're starting to come out. I've only got a few left. Now that they're all out, I'll drop fill a little bit of CA super glue. And maybe I can sand this down where I can get rid of all those mounds. Look real close, you can see leading up to each fret slot there's like a cupped bit of polyester. Because they put in the frets, then they sprayed them. And they sprayed them thick. And it's thicker on the side that's the side of the fret that's towards the body because they obviously had the necks hanging upside down when they sprayed them. Here I am, sanding away. My intention, again, was just to power sand off the mounds, hand sand till I get it where it looks, you know, kind of good. But these power tools, I got carried away, and next thing you knew, I had about half of the finish. I was down to raw wood on about, I don't know, not half, but maybe 20% of the neck was showing raw wood. And at that point I said, well, let's just sand by hand and get it down to, I got it down to about 90% bare wood. 10% of the original sealer was still on there when I was done sanding. It was hard to tell where I was at with it all. Fortunately, this neck didn't need any manipulation as far as a warpage in the neck or a ski jump at the, you know, at the heel. It was mostly just a bear to get those frets out. Refinishing it was probably the easy part. Okay, now this is the die grinder. That first sander was a right-angled random orbit, but it wasn't getting off enough, quick enough for me. So this is when I went to the die grinder. And this baby is 80 grit discs. It really removes a lot of material quick. And I was wearing a respirator, and I had my big old jet sealing air collector or dust collector going. You can see the dust coming off this. Nothing worse than the smell of vaporized polyester. That's my 80 grit disc. Clean it off often and go back at it. I'll do the rest of the sanding by hand, cleaning off my sandpaper often. I'll use 120, 220, and 320 grit to finish it off before I start spraying. I'll vacuum off the dust. Try and get it to slots. I'll use various lengths on the sanding beams. We're not trying to true up the wood at all. This neck had a good shape to it, but looks like I did 80 grit through 320 grit. I'll use a wire brush to try to get all the dust out of the scratches and see where I'm at with it. I don't want to leave any scratches in it. 320 grit scratches are perfect. That's what you call a mechanical bond between the wood and the leftover sealer coat. You know, maybe I only did up to 220 grit. I think I only did 220 because I wanted a little extra tooth for my new finish to grab onto. And I'm not too worried about layer lines between the old or original finish and the new finish. I'm just kind of worried about scratch marks. I'll end up doing about 10 coats of shellac base and then about 4 coats of nitrocellulose lacquer on top. I'll put the color into the base coats of shellac. I'm mixing the liquid colored tone straw. Vintage amber is too yellow, and anything with a brown at the end is too brown. I remember a Dan Earlywine video, a Stumac video on the Stumac channel, but it was a Dan video where I first heard of straw, and he used it on a Fender bass neck. And it's the whole reason they developed that color was for these guitars. So that's what we use. There's no need to experiment. Straw is your ticket every time. Well, I'm getting carried away with some super Oslick sandpapers now, aren't I? That's good stuff. It has such a shallow scratch pattern that I won't need to worry about any scratch marks at all. Sanding scratches, that is. I considered wiping on a new finish. I do have some polyurethane that might be doable. I gave it a try. I didn't like what I was seeing. I'll clean it off and take it back down for a spray. I want to get it to match the headstock. Before I spray, though, I'll prep the fret slots with a diamond triangle file and my Waverly fret saw. I've had that Waverly fret saw for over 20 years. And it's still sharp. One of my friends in Sheffield, England says you can still take that saw right on down to the shop where it was made to get it sharpened. And Sheffield's known for their steel. I'm starting the masking process because I don't want any overspray on the back side of the neck, on the face of the headstock. This is 2-pound cut shellac. You can measure it out, but what I do is I take 1 part shellac flakes, these are de-waxed, and 5 parts by volume of denatured alcohol. And then I dilute it just a skosh more so it sprays a little better. If it's too thick, it won't atomize good, and you might get too much orange peel. This is my straw stain from Color Tone, Stu-Mac, Trans Tint. Oh, that color looks good. Remember, maple wood is not quite the same as a white paper towel. It's already got a little bit of a skinned color to it. So when the straw goes on, it definitely looks more like the headstock. A good match. Every time between coats, I take a wet paintbrush and clean off the nozzle. And this is a 0.8 millimeter, I should say. That's my jet air filter mounted on the ceiling there. And the shellac dust goes up and out into that filter. I'll do 10 coats of this, let it set for a few days, and I'll give it a little sanding. After a few days, you can see that very light orange peel texture that it has. There. But we've got our color done, and we've got a few top coats over that to protect the color. I'm just going to do a light sanding with 600 grit Oscillix sandpaper on a foam pad. Okay guys, here we are. It's been 4 days since my last coat of shellac. It's looking great. Little orange peel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to level sand it with 600 grit Super Oscillix sandpaper. And I'm going to take it outside and I'm going to hit it with 3 coats of this Mohawk stringed instrument lacquer. Over the course of about 4 hours, I'll do 3 coats of this. And then I'll wait like 5-6 hours. At the very end of the day, I'll sand it again with the sandpaper and I'll give it a lacquer shot of the ultra thin flash coat. And then I'll be done spraying. I'll be done sanding. And we'll wait a couple days and we'll take it right to the buffer. But I'll be back tomorrow to show you how it looks. Alright, here we are next morning. You can see the orange peel is there still, but it's a very fine orange peel. When you get to this point of an orange peel kind of texture, you can buff it out with a guitar buffer. There's no need to wet sand this, which is great because we can leave all that film thickness on there. You don't need to remove anything. But what I was getting at is that I will let this gas off and harden for another 2 or 3 days before I put the frets in. And then once I get everything leveled and everything, we'll do like a final fret polish and lacquer buffing down at the wheel. Alright, I'll be back in a few days. Alright, I got her all loaded into the proper guitar workstation from Total Vice, and I'm doing a little testing. Fret slot preparation. It really depends on which size fret you choose, the tang width and the barb, how it feels, what type of wood the fretboard is made out of is a big deal as to how easily the frets will go in. They need to be seated all the way without being too loose and popping back out. This size wire seems to work real good in maple necks with the factory Fender fret slot. They all have a certain width to them that worked good for their sideways fret installation, and it seems to work best with this wire. Even though StewMac claims all their fret tang sizes are the same, they're not. They're all different depths, of course. They list that on their website, but they don't go in the same to all the different types of woods. I use a little bit of old brown glue in the slots. Now I guess I'm changed my mind to Fender 141. Maybe the 148 wasn't working out after all. And the neck never made its way down to the guitar buffer. I was worried. I don't know why, but I just decided, I thought, why don't we wait till after the frets are installed? Then we'll buff it, and we'll be polishing the frets at the same time we're buffing the finish. So that's what I plan to do. And it turned out I did need to deepen the fret slots just by a hair. And I didn't want to mar up my fresh finish with the guide on the fret saw. So I put down a single piece of masking tape so that the guide could ride right on top of the tape. And I just moved the tape on down the line for each fret slot. Old brown glue and a hammer. That's a dead blow hammer. Some may ask, why don't you just leave the guitar on to refret it? Well, I'm going to be using a lot of files to bevel the edges, and I'm going to be finishing the edges, and I just want that extra space over here. I test each fret as I install them with a 3/1000 of an inch feeler gauge to make sure I can't put the feeler gauge between the finish and the crown. Every fret gets tested. If it doesn't go all the way down, we work on it some more. Sometimes it takes a little crimping. Very light crimping with these side cutters. I've ground down one of the jaws to cradle the crown side of each fret, while the other one nips down and peens the bottom side of the tang. That'll make sure it stays down. Sometimes the fret slot gets a little sloppy and you have to modify the tang. Sometimes it's perfect where every fret goes in the same, and sometimes you have to make slight modifications as you go. And that was the case on this one. Probably the hardest refret I've ever had to do, because I did this full-on refin thing. Now it's time to shape and polish the frets. I'll use a Dynaglide on my files to help lubricate. Usually in between my 320 grit and 400 grit, I use that diamond file. After the diamond file, I'll use the maroon Scotch-Brite pad. And then I continue on with 400 through 2000 grit sandpapers. Now I soften the bevels of each fret end. In between 1000 and 1200, I use a gray Scotch-Brite pad. So this fret wire, the 141, this is called medium high. It's 95 thousandths of an inch wide, and it's 45 thousandths of an inch tall. The tang is 73 thousandths deep. And that's why I had to use that saw again. I got nervous about taking the neck back down to the buffing wheel. When you run buffing compound over metal, it leaves a black residue. And I already had a little of this kind of fret gray dust, I'll show you in a second, right on the edges where I'm wiping that shellac there. I already cleaned it off of the edges and gave them a slight round over, but I didn't want more of this black getting into my fresh finish or over the edges of the fretboard. So I ended up not doing anything with the StewMac guitar buffer. I just gave it a little polish by hand with some Viva paper towels and some 105 Ultra Cut compound, and I decided I was just going to live with a little bit of orange peel. If the orange peel is offensive to anyone, or the customer is the only one that really matters, I'll put it on the buffer. But this is that gray edge that I was talking about. Look at that. So this is what I'm going to do to get it off of there. And you'll notice a little bit of that white residue on the second fret. I'm going to get that off of there, and I'm going to brush in some finish on that one side of that one fret. It's the only one that really had a tear out. But I'll take naphtha and denatured alcohol mixed, and I'll clean up that edge. I'll get that gray look off of there. But it leaves a raw exposed wood edge now. And I'll go over top of that with some of the 2-pound cut shellac on paper towels or Q-tips. And as you can see, it looks beautiful again. The frets are shiny on the ends, a nice bevel, and the edge of the fretboard is looking sharp, metaphorically sharp. I let it set around for a few days, and then I give it a little polish, because that's fresh shellac on the edges of the fretboard. And now it's time for reassembly. Today is a good day. We get to hear this baby again. We're going to string it up with some Ernie Ball Super Slinkies 9 through 42, and that's real slinky. Oh yeah, I'm going to reuse the original nut by filling in the fret slots with the nut rescue powder, cutting them slightly less deep, the nut slots that is, the string slots, and then giving them a polish with my micro mesh pads. Cleaning and polishing. Fresh and so. The very last thing I do to the frets is 4/0 steel wool. And then the very last thing I do to the fretboard is the Meguiar's 105 Ultra Cut compound on Viver paper towels. A little orange peel, I can live with it. Once the strings are on, you can barely notice it. Trizac 3000 on the edge. And a little bit of the 105 compound. Once we get them super slinkies on there, I'll say she's ready. Ready for some action. Ready to go home to the 12-foot chain YouTube channel. This is Doug's guitar. Those are my Luth brushes, Nomad files. I got the nut slots all dialed in. Let's give her a listen.